VocalEye Almost Live Zoom, another speed date with the cosmos, hosted by Amy Amantea, with special guests Christine Malec and Dr. Sheri Wells-Jensen.
Welcome to this VocalEye Almost Live event. My name is Amy Amantea. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the Associate Director for VocalEye. I'm your host for these on-live events, and, well, I'm a member of the blind community. I'm really proud to be a member of the blind community. And I always like to extend a big thank you to folks who have supported us throughout the past couple of years and to present, who have written fabulous testimonial letters, who have made generous donations to VocalEye in order to help increase this kind of programming. This stuff all is of great value to us, so keep those letters coming. If you have capacity to make a donation, we are always we are always accepting those and thanking you for your generosity. So there's always ways of contacting us, whether it's a link in the chat or through our website or through our regular emails. You know how to find us. If you happen to be enjoying this particular event on our YouTube channel, we would really like you to hit those little like and subscribe buttons. That also would really help us out. VocalEye is broadcasting to you all from the traditional and stolen lands of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. So what was I doing? Of course, every week I try and find a land acknowledgement that maybe relates a little bit to what our programming is. And so I found a story from an old Iroquois story. So here's how it goes. This is a story that the old Iroquois told to their children during the winter months. Many winters in the past, there was a Mohawk village village of bark houses along the Oswego River. One day, Mohawk hunters discovered the tracks of a great bear. These tracks appeared many times and surrounded the village. The local game began to disappear from the forests, and the Mohawks knew that the great bear was killing and eating all of their food. Because of the village's meat racks had become empty, many of the families came to the Mohawk people and said, "Please, we are starving. You must do something." At once, a party of Mohawk warriors set out in search of this great bear. They soon came upon his tracks in the snow. They followed the bear and the bear's tracks for many, many moons. And when they finally caught up to the huge beast, they took aim with their arrows. But to their surprise and dismay, the arrows failed to pierce the thick skin of the bear. At last, the angry bear turned and charged the hunters, who fled. Many were overtaken. Only 2 hunters escaped, and they returned to the village to tell this sad tale. War party after war party set out to destroy this great bear, but always they failed. There were many battles fought between many warriors and the bear over many years. As time went on, more and more deer vanished from the forests. The people became thin because of the lack of food. Starvation caused many to become sick. The people were filled with fear and hunger. One night, 3 brothers each had 3 dreams on 3 consecutive dates. They dreamed that they had taken a hold of the bear and killed it. They said, "This dream must be true." So, getting their supplies together, they set off after the bear. In a little while, they came upon the tracks of this great bear. Quickly, they followed the trail and they aimed their arrows. For many moons, they followed the tracks of the bear across the earth. The tracks led them to the end of the world. Looking ahead, they saw the giant beast leap from the earth into the heavens. Without hesitation, the 3 brothers followed them, and they launched into the sky after the bear. And to this day, when the Iroquois see the Big Dipper in the sky, they say, "See, the 3 hunters are still chasing the great bear." I love that little story because as we're going to explore some constellation stuff and some space stuff tonight, I wanted to just make a little reference as to how these Indigenous folks had revered the story of the Great Bear and how it became a part of the night sky. So, welcome everyone to this Wednesday, July the 12th, 2023. Today, we're proud to offer you our Almost Live event number 127. This is another speed date with the cosmos. And of course, we have our friend Christine Malec in the space. So, welcome, Christine.
Hello, thank you, thank you. I always enjoy your land acknowledgements so much. And I was thinking about this and how um, the stars have meaning to many people, and that for Indigenous people, stars were a means of navigation.
Mm-hmm.
And we think about lights and GPS or roads, but stars were all, for most of human history, were a means of getting around at night and orienting yourself and knowing what time of year it was and what you should be doing at this time of year and how to navigate. So I love that you made that connection by choosing that story.
And I bet that that is lost on a lot of us modern day folks. Maybe if you're still a seafaring person, right?
Yeah.
Navigating the seas. Maybe if you're farming, I don't know what other industries, but certainly we become reliant on our GPSs. And listen, if I had to follow the night sky, I'd be lost.
Well, we'd all, many
This
people in the
blind girl
Zoom
would
room
be
here,
so lost.
we'd be in trouble. We'd be in
We'd
trouble.
be in trouble.
It's interesting, though, how many amateur astronomers there are, and how many people, it's not their career, but it's their passion
Mhm.
to look at the night sky and observe and try to get images. And it's not because they're, astronomers in their day job or that they're even necessarily scientists, but there's still a lively, thriving interest to look at the night sky and try to understand what you're seeing, and or even just look at the night sky and not know what you're seeing. But there's definitely there's Facebook groups about it and websites, and there's lots of people who still find value, sighted people find value in looking at the stars over long periods of time and knowing what they're seeing and
Well,
capturing
one of the
images.
most interesting things that, and I hope I'm remembering this correctly, but one of the most interesting things that I learned in doing all these little sort of speed dates with you with the cosmos is the fact that the images that we see from these high-powered telescopes of deep space, perhaps, um, are actually like it's a collection of data that
Yes.
has to be translated into something that the eye can see, which makes sense because maybe a lot of it is gaseous, right? And so you can't
Yes.
really
Yeah.
see that with the naked eye. So they add color to it, and then all of a sudden the sky's filled with color.
That's
Um,
right.
and
That's
I
right.
and it was so interesting to me because I just took for granted that the photos that I had always been able to see before, like on
Hmm.
computers and whatnot, were actual photos of the universe. Well, you know what I mean? Like we're
Yes, yes,
literal
of
photos.
course, optical.
Yeah,
And some of it is, like the Hubble Space Telescope, for
yeah.
example, that's optical. Lots of it is optical, but you're absolutely right. And this is something we'll dive into a lot tonight because it's all information, and the way we take in information is through our senses.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have a really quite a narrow range. Even if you have all five, it's still quite a narrow range of data that we can perceive directly. And so a lot of what we know, comes from other things. And
Mm-hmm.
yes, so it's a great point that you make that I will come back to, because it's all information, and the question really is, how do we get it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was a huge aha moment for me.
Me
Totally.
too. Me too.
Yeah,
I
when I learned
remember.
that.
Oh, okay. I actually felt more included in
Yeah,
in
I
the
know, me
world of
too.
the
Yeah,
cosmos when I figured that out. Oh, so
yeah,
sighted people, they're not really getting the whole truth. They're
yeah,
getting a version, of the
yeah. They're
information.
getting a translation of data.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And yeah, it was a really a good aha moment for me too. And I always like to make clear when I present on astronomy that I'm not a scientist. And in a way that's better, because it means I'm not likely to go off into big word tangents and stuff, but I'm just someone who's really interested. So it's absolutely a subject that people can approach with curiosity, and you don't have to be a scientist, you don't have to be good at math or any of that stuff to be curious and interested. And there's so many levels of entry points to how we can know about the universe.
Awesome. So you've got a special guest in the space.
I do.
And it's not me, friends. Christine has
Oh, you're
another special
special all the
guest.
time, but you're not a guest. You're special. You're not a guest. I am so grateful and lucky to be introducing a guest who will be chatting about some of the. So I've got some material, and we're going to have lots of conversation. So our guest is Sheri Wells-Jensen, who, and I'm just quoting this from her email from her email signature because that's the level of researcher I am. She's with the NASA Library of Congress, a chair in astrobiology, exploration, and scientific innovation. And I just wish my business card could say that. So, Sheri, welcome, welcome, welcome. You are in DC, is that right?
I am in DC at the Library of Congress, which is actually just a couple miles away from the National Library Service for the Blind, where all the Braille books in the world for me came from when I was a kid. So there might not be
Oh,
any Braille books at the actual fancy buildings of the Library of Congress, but we are within grasping distance of where they all come from, which is kind of magic to me.
that is kind of that's the kind of place you might have made a pilgrimage to anyway.
Exactly. To stand among and between shelves and shelves of books from over your head to down by your feet, and you can take anyone off the shelf and read it. It is magic. It's magic like the cosmos is magic. It's amazing to me.
That's a wild idea. I've never been in a Braille library.
You
That's
should come, my friend. Come on down here.
what a time we would have. What a time
Yeah.
we would have. I just before I get into, my curated my intended content, Sheri, I haven't even asked you this, and so could you please tell us what your title means? So, chair in astrobiology. What is astrobiology?
Oh my gosh. Okay, so first off, like I legitimately have to read this. I've had this job. It's a 9-month position, and I am in month what, 4, 5, 6, 7, and I have the title of this position written down in Braille, and I read it to people because man, I don't remember it. It's actually Baruch S. Blumberg, NASA / Library of Congress Chair in Astrobiology, etc. I always forget the last bits.
Oh,
Wow.
whew,
It's
I
super.
thought you said there were no big words tonight.
sorry. We'll try to keep it under four syllables or less.
I mean, astrobiology sounds like a big word, but if you break it down, it's clear. It's just astro, which means stars, and bio, which means life, and logi, which is, the logi, that means study. It's just the study of anything that has to do with life, meaning humans or not humans, or the search for life in outer space. It's kind of the coolest thing ever.
How did you get into doing that?
Okay, so it's kind of a long story, so you probably don't want the whole story. I'm trying to think what is the abbreviated story. Let's see. So I'm a linguist by training, and so, but I intended to be an astronomer. But growing up as a blind girl in a rural setting in the 1970s, you didn't go, "Hey, I'm going to be an astronomer," and have people take you seriously, which is a shame, and I hope it never happens to anybody ever again. But I became a linguist because that's still science, and language is fun. And so I started studying what you might need to construct a message, because that's linguistics, right? To construct a message that we might send from human beings to intelligent beings on another planet. Like how could you, if you're going to send a radio signal, what would that be like? Given that you've got nothing, you can't point to things, which is nice as a blind person. I'm tired of people pointing at things. You got nothing. All you know is that they received your message, assuming they did, right? And so what could you do to strike up some kind of communication if all you've got is a radio signal, and the radio signal is the wispiest, slightest of threads to connect to entire civilizations that you could ever imagine? So what could you put in that radio signal? We can't just send this broadcast, right? Because they would have no freaking idea what we were talking about. They wouldn't know our language. So what could you do? So that's kind of how I got started, because it was a linguist's way in. And then I started thinking about what would a blind alien race be like, and how would we discover all the science?
I'm
know
turning
how-
with
you know
glee
how-
on the inside. That's awesome.
I know. So like, you know how we struggle in science classrooms sometimes because stuff isn't accessible? Well, that is nonsense, because if we were left on our own as blind people, we could discover all the science. We just do it in a different order. We wouldn't start with astronomy because I've never seen the stars. So big deal. I mean, they're pretty, whatever. Sorry. I mean, they're pretty. I don't mean to cast shade on anyone who looks at stars and thinks they're pretty, but pretty is only a little tiny piece of the wonder that is science. The wonder that is science doesn't come from looking at the stars. It comes from your soul, just your sense of, oh my God, it's amazing. And so I wrote this paper, and I'm not going to lie, I was super duper proud of it. It was a paper about how these blind alien creatures were going to go from, hey, let's fumble around and be alive and catch food and eat it and maybe grow some plants, to like building a radio telescope, which means they had to smelt metal. And it was beautiful. I was really proud of it. And I presented this paper, and I was so freaking proud of myself. And we argued about it, and we debated, and we went back and forth. And it was maybe one of the most fun hours of science I've ever had with a room full of people. And then I got done, and I said to myself, hey, self, I've just shown all these people that blind people can do all the science anyone else can do. And we could like have a planet, and we could grow all the technology, and I win. And just as I thought I was winning, I was done. And I was stepping away from the microphone, and some dude, bless his soul, some little dude jumped up out of the front row and came trotting up these 3 steps that led to the stage, because he was convinced that I was not going to be able to walk down those 3 steps unassisted safely to get back to my seat. And so I said to myself, shoot, we have more stuff to do than just accumulating data here, right? We've got, if we're going to do anything about making science accessible and making a place, and we'll talk about this later, making a place for blind people as astronauts, you know, along with everybody else, we're all going to space if we survive, which I hope we do. We have a lot more to do than just present people with facts. We've got some barriers to overcome, because this poor fellow just had all the facts about how I was going to smelt freaking metal, which super dangerous, right? Hello. And build a telescope and reach the stars on my own. But he didn't think I could walk down 3 steps.
That attitudinal barrier.
Yeah, and deep, because much to my horror, nobody said at him, hey, sit down, dumbass. And you learned nothing. They're just like, oh, he's going to help her down the steps. That's really nice.
What a kind fellow.
What a kind fellow.
He meant well, Sheri.
Except, how did you get up the steps to begin with?
Exactly.
That's what I ask myself every time someone micromanages me at the top of an escalator. My gosh, where would I be without you right now? Because how did I get here without you?
So sorry, beloveds, but they are so wrong.
We all, yeah, it's true.
I mean, everybody here gets this, right? So like, it's kind of a twin thing, right? If you want to make progress, you've got to do the facts. You've got to, you really need the data. And then you've got to do all that other stuff, all that really super exhausting stuff that you just have to do.
It is exhausting. It is exhausting. It's true. So I think I will begin with some of the things that I put together to share with all of you. And I've been in this space before to talk about accessible astronomy, and I had some examples. And today is more of that, some new things and some innovative things that are going on around making astronomy accessible to people who are blind or low vision. And Amy made a great introduction by talking about how astronomy is normally presented. Astronomy is normally presented visually because most of the world is sighted. And if you're someone like NASA, who's got a big public education budget, they really care about reaching as many people as possible. So they started out with images, and those are meant to engage people. And we're going to talk more about specific images and how they're not really actually images, they're representations. But before we do that, I'm going to introduce all of this material with a question. And it's not a rhetorical question, it's a question that I do want to come back to and discuss, but I want to plant it as a little seed to keep in mind as we listen and talk, and perhaps to revisit it later and discuss. And the question, which has been posed many times and is a very important question, is why do we spend money on space exploration and understanding the universe, the cosmos, when we have so many dire problems on Earth? And we do. So, my question is it valuable to spend money researching astronomy and exploring space? Is that a good use of our resources? So I'm just going to leave that here for now, and we're going to come back to it at various points, or at least at the end. So I want to acknowledge a spectral presence with us, which is JJ Hunt, because some of the clips that we are going to hear are lifted directly from the Talk Description to Me podcast. And it's not just because I think the podcast is really good, although I do. I've chosen these clips because they are descriptions of things to do with astronomy and space. And so we were, I was mentioning that for most people, the interest in astronomy as a non-scientist gets triggered by images. And in visual culture, if you are sort of visually literate as a member of the sighted world, there are some things and images that we call iconic. They're just classic. They're known, they're recognized. People know immediately what you're talking about. And so the first audio clip I'd like to play is JJ describing a photo that was taken on the Apollo 17 mission, and it's the big blue ball. And this is an image that was a very powerful one for humans at the time. So this would have been, I think, is 1972. And I think we'll listen, and then I'll kind of highlight why one of the reasons why I chose this as a place to start. So Rick, can we play file number 1, please? The big blue ball.
Think of the famous photo called the Blue Marble. This was taken on December 7th, 1972, from 29,000 kilometers above the Earth on the Apollo 17 mission. This is a clean and crisp image of the Earth. It's a perfect looking sphere against a black backdrop, and the Earth has swirls of white clouds covering dark blue oceans and brownish landforms. The sun for this picture was behind the astronauts, so in this image the Earth is in full light. It makes it particularly clear and bright. And this picture of the Earth was revolutionary to people. There had been pictures from space of Earth before in other Apollo missions, but this one was so vivid, so clear. It has become one of the most widely distributed photos ever taken in the history of photography.
I chose that clip because it is one of the things that you hear from anyone who's been in space, from any astronaut, that the experience of seeing Earth from a distance is unique and life-changing. And to see the Earth without borders, we're used to maps with borders that separate us. And when you see the Earth from a distance, those are not there. And people speak about their emotional responses to that image in very powerful terms. And so I feel like it's a good place for us to start, because we're going to take a journey around the cosmos and back again. And we start at Earth. That's our home, and that's the place where we evolved and where we for the most part till now can live safely. And so starting from the Earth, we're going to spread outward. And the next audio clip I'd like to play is It's a bit longer, it's 4.5 minutes, and it is JJ describing the planet Mars and also the landing site for the most recent rover that is currently on Mars right now, looking for signs of life. And so what we're going to hear is a description of what Mars looks like to anyone who's been able to look at images, real optical images of Mars, and also of the specific location that was chosen as a good likely candidate for looking for evidence of life on Mars. So, Rick, if we could play file number 2, please.
Mars really does look red. Now, not a solid red, right? So I've got a couple of images here that more or less fill the screen of my laptop. If this was an object sitting in your hand, it would be somewhere between the size of a grapefruit and the size of a cantaloupe. So at that distance, at that perspective, Mars is reddish in color, but like a coppery color of red, like a brick red. And even from this distance, it looks dusty. There's a dull quality to the color. And it's mottled. So it's not a solid ball of uniform color. It is mottled. Some places are darker, some places are lighter. And it looks kind of like a bowling ball in that with something like the planet Earth, which is, of course, that's what everything is compared to Earth, with us being Earthlings and all. We've got continents, we've got water, we've got cloud, we've got deserts, we've got forests. There's all sorts of color variation. There's all sorts of land shape variation. Not as much with Mars. It's uniformly desert-like, all surfaces. There are canyons, there are like planetary scars. There are like rings, which are craters. There are volcanoes. There are cracks and rents in the surface, and some of those are quite dark. But it's still all desert. It's all this dusty color of coppery red. And then when you get closer to the landing site is a Jezero crater. And this is a crater that once held a lake. We're going there. I've seen some concept art of the lake as well as some satellite images. And in the concept art, they show this crater filled with water. It's a lake that is hemmed in by the raised lip of the crater. And there are two winding rivers or streams that are connected to the main crater toward this. Like there are marshy areas or smaller bodies of water at the far ends of these winding rivers or streams that lead to and away from the main river. So there's an inflow channel at, we'll call it 12 o'clock, and then there's an outflow channel at 4 o'clock. And you can see that both in the concept art and the artist's interpretation, as well as in satellite images. You can still see the dry channels that would be coming in at 12 o'clock and going out at 4 o'clock. And there's a delta deposit at the mouth of the inflow channel. So this is a landform where sediment has been deposited by moving water as it arrives at this larger body of water. And this is the place to live if you're a microorganism. And that's why Jezero Crater is the place where they want to land, because they've got access to this delta.
Oh my God, you got me with the delta. So when you're looking at the image that is not the artist's conception, but the actual image, does your eye see lake, river, delta?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially once you know it's there. If you see this image and there's a caption at the bottom that tells you, that gives you some scientific information that this is a picture of a dry lake bed with an inflow and an outflow, it's clear as day. You can see the channel and you can see where there would have been a marshy area, and then when you zoom in closer you can see this delta deposit. They highlight it in some of their images, but even without highlighting it, you can see that there's something there, that there is a deposit that is different. The texture appears different. The topography of the delta appears different than the rest of the inside of this crater, which is relatively flat and smooth.
There's a few things I want to highlight there. First of all, I want to make sure that it's clear that there's an artist conception and then there's the actual visual of Mars. So there is currently no surface water on Mars, but the way that the landforms look on Mars, it looks like there probably was. So what JJ is describing there is the classic appearance of a lake bed with an inflow and an outflow and a river delta, which is a deposit of land like the Nile Delta or the Mississippi Delta, which is a deposit of land like a triangular deposit at a river mouth, and which are notoriously fertile spots. And so this is another example of how NASA and other science agencies rely on the visual. So they're showing Mars as it appears from cameras that have viewed it. And they also use techniques to help people imagine. And so an artist's conception imagines what Mars would look like with surface water. And so those are great teaching tools for sighted people. And what's happening now in astronomy is that we're trying to expand how we can present material. So these clips are great examples of what can be done with description. And so with a describer who's trained in that, they can look at the tools that NASA's providing and can describe them for us in a way that makes sense to us as members of the blind community. So it's one of the tools that is being so effectively brought to the discussion of how to make astronomy more accessible. No, so expanding outward from Mars, when I was growing up, the idea of constellations was kind of mysterious, still sort of is mysterious. They are groups of stars that people interpret as looking like something. And it wasn't until not that long ago, a few years, maybe 5 years, where I was able to touch a tactile representation of a constellation and try and make the connections that people's eyes made. And one of the things that I got to wondering about was, do different cultures around the world see the same things when they see the same group of stars? Does the human mind always go in the same direction, or do is it culturally determined, or what's that about? Because I'm kind of approaching it, as we all do as blind people, we're approaching it as like, well, I don't really have a bias here. So how do other cultures interpret that? So I've got another clip of JJ describing some work that an artist did with this idea and what different cultures see when they look at the same groups of stars. So Rick, if we could play the next audio file, please.
Yes, this is really cool. So this is an astronomer named Nadi Bramer, I believe is how you pronounce her name. And she is an astronomer and data visualization designer. And so she's got this website. She and her team have a website. And the article that you had sent me was called Figures in the Sky, I believe. We can link to it in our description. And the kind of tagline was how cultures across the world have seen their myths and legends in the sky. And what they did was they mapped the constellations of 28 different cultures. And these are cultures that range from what they call the modern, quote unquote, modern Western culture, Chinese, Maori, Aztecs, all over the world. And they assigned a different color to each culture. And I mean, there's so many that the various shades of color can be a little bit tricky to differentiate, but 28 different cultures, each with its own color. And then they would focus on a particular area of the sky where many different cultures have a constellation, and then layer all of those on top of each other. And so you could click through either to look at an individual culture, or you could look at all of the shapes mapped across the various stars in a certain area or region, and see the different shapes that different cultures would
Wow.
see. Yeah, very cool.
So you could just pick one point in the sky.
Yeah, and they had kind of chosen important stars, or stars that are represented in lots of cultures. So, for example, Betelgeuse. Betelgeuse is a red supergiant, and it is one of the brightest stars in the night sky. So, not surprisingly, it has been used in lots of different constellations. 17 of the 28 cultures have a constellation that involves Betelgeuse.
Oh.
It's most commonly known to us in the West. It's part of Orion, the constellation of Orion, who wears the belt. Let's describe the basic shape of Orion. That's probably helpful. The core element of Orion is a vaguely rectangular shape with stars at each of the four corners, and then it's pinched in the middle by a belt, so it kind of narrows in the middle as if it's a torso with a belt, and it's pinched in the middle by a belt of three stars on a slight angle. So it's very distinctive, these three bright stars side by side, boom, boom, boom. And then the shoulders are stars, and kind of the hips essentially would be two stars as well. And the shoulder that is, here I am, I'm going to say it, upper left, that's Betelgeuse. That's the Betelgeuse star. And that basic shape, as I say, we call it Orion. The Arabic constellations, they refer to it as the giant. It's called the throne in Belarus. In Egypt, it's known as the god Sa. The Hawaiian star lines refer to that as the cat's cradle. The Sardinian culture calls that the Styx. And in some of those constellations, of course, it's not just those stars that I've mentioned. There are stars around it that get pulled into the image. And so in some cultures, there's that figure has an arm out and is wielding a bow. In others, they have created a version of that constellation where the character is wielding a staff or maybe a scythe.
This was interesting to me on a few levels. One of which is that as a blind person, the constellations are meaningless in a certain sense because they rely on seeing patterns and in what you can see. So even a sighted people of different visual acuities might not see the same constellation. And so it's not that the stars are arranged in a particular way, it's that the human mind looks for patterns. And that's the other thing that I take from that description that really stuck with me, is that even if you're not an astronomer, people look up at the sky and they look for meaning. They're looking for meaning. They're looking for something they recognize. Is it a figure from mythology? Is it something from daily life? And for me, that curiosity and that interest in finding patterns and understanding them, or bringing some kind of understanding to bear on them, is everyone can share that. Whether you understand mathematics or physics or whether you don't, we all can share that curiosity and that looking for patterns. And it makes me think too, I wonder what constellations we would make if we used non-visual data. What if, instead of just what you saw when you looked up at the sky, what if we used radio emissions or X-rays or some other type of data that comes from stars that is not in the visual range? Would we have a different idea of constellations? And that's something that I like to think about too, from a blindness perspective. And to Shelley's point about what would a race that did not have vision, how would such a race interpret the cosmos? Um,
Can I pop in here, Chris? 'Cause
please,
this
please.
is, I think, this is a really, these images of stars and images of the planets are really powerful for sighted people. And as for someone who has never seen them, there used to be a moment, and I think I felt a little twinge of this when when JJ was doing such a beautiful description of these things, where I felt suddenly like this wonder and this longing. And I thought, and I used to interpret that as a desperate desire to see what other people are seeing. I used to think that that was a blindness thing, like, I wish I weren't blind. But I think what's really happening is a thing called the overview effect. And you may have read about this. So when people go up in these little, how all of the billionaires in recent history have gone on these little suborbital flights where they take a little spaceship, a little vessel that's about the size of your living room, and they pop up over the atmosphere, and then they all look out the windows and they go, "Oh, glory!" And they're incredibly moved by looking down at the Earth from space. And for me, most memorably, William Shatner, Captain Kirk, went up and he expected to feel elated, and he felt this incredible sense of grief that we were all just, this is all we had, this planet. And I think that sighted people tend to attribute that feeling to what they see. And I've often been to conferences where astronauts will talk about the visual impact of being in space and looking back at Earth. And so my first thought was, well, what would a blind person do in space? Would we just go, zero gravity is fun, I'm in space, no big deal? Or would we feel it? And I think that the problem with this discussion of the overview effect and this desperation to see Earth from space is a misattribution of the source of wonder. Probably a lot of you, if you're anything like me, you hear a description of stars and planets and you feel this yearning, you feel this moment of, I'm kind of small and there's something that I want, and it's big and strong and powerful. That's it, my friends. That's the overview effect. You are missing exactly nothing. That is exactly what, if you read the accounts of the astronauts when they're in space, they feel this sense of wonder and awe, and like they're small, and there's something deeply beautiful about the universe. And you feel that. You all do. You've all felt it from time to time. It's never come from an image for me, but it's come from just the awareness that we are a small planet and we are so lost in this great immensity of space, and we need each other so desperately to survive. And it comes from music, it comes from love, it comes from, I don't know, whatever it is you have in your world that smalls you out and makes you feel that there's an immensity around you. And I think that sighted people have that triggered for them visually when they look at stars and pictures. But that's only one point of access to that feeling. And the feeling is the important thing, right? That feeling of, oh my gosh, we are all one. And it's hard for me to talk about, because every time I talk about it, I sort of feel like I might cry. Just that feeling that we're all one and we need each other so desperately, and life is so beautiful and crazy and wild and ridiculous, and aren't we lucky just to be alive? That is the overview effect, and you have all experienced it already. You don't need to go to space. You don't need to see these pictures, although these pictures are beautiful, and all power to people who can see them. I'm not not going to cast any shade there, but I think that these descriptions are exactly perfect because they give you the facts that you are missing, which is why I love talk description to me so much. It's brilliant. But they give you the facts that you are missing, but you are not missing the experience, because the experience is something deeply human that you've all felt.
For the benefit of anyone on the YouTube, while you were speaking, Sheri, I kept squinting my eyes and squeezing them shut in like ecstasy of yes, yes, yes. Like I feel that yearning. I feel that, and I love that you named it and you perfectly expressed it. That for me, I remember it starting as a kid when I was first exposed to the ideas of eternity and infinity. And to this day, I can still get this great mix of terror and wonder when I just let myself think about either of those concepts. And yes, the visuals that are these iconic things that people look at, that's one way, but we all we all have that inside of us. Oh my gosh, thank you for articulating that. So
Exactly. That is your birthright as humans. Please, please, please don't let anyone tell you that you are missing something essential. You are missing details. And I like the details. I'm not going to lie. I think it's cool. And I really am grateful to have the details filled in for me. But you are not missing the essence of those pictures, because those pictures are a visual representation of one.
yes, yes, thank you. Oh my gosh. Um, and the curiosity to understand the universe better has led people, smart people, to think about how can we get there? Can we get there? And so the next little bit that I want to talk about is how have humans tried to get there? And what does that look like? And what does it look like today? And so many of you will know that space exploration began in the 1950s, and it was kind of a space race between the United States and the Soviet Union. Unfortunate that it got accelerated by Cold War tensions instead of pure scientific curiosity, but so it went. And so for many decades, it was I don't know what the two thing equivalent of diolithic, maybe. There was two main powers in the space world. There was the United States and the Soviet Union, and after the Soviet Union, Russia. And more recently, the playing field has become much wider, and it's partly a response to less funding and just the inevitable way that market forces work. And so, what you've got now is more private enterprise getting involved in launching things into space. And I I found this great little calendar online as a way to illustrate this point. And so, what it is, it's a list of launches into space in June. And so, I'm just going to read through this because it's super fun. So, this was June, and I think I've got July in here too. So, let's see. June 27th. Uh, a Russian civilian weather satellite will be launched at Site 1S Vostochny Cosmodrome at 7:34 a.m. aboard a Soyuz rocket. July. July the 1st, a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket will launch the Euclid mission for the European Space Agency, ESA. Euclid aims to learn more about the parts of the universe we can't see, specifically dark energy and dark matter. The launch is scheduled for 11:12 a.m. EDT from Cape Canaveral, Florida. July the 4th, Arianespace will launch the Syracuse B and Heinrich Hertz communications satellites aboard an Ariane 5 rocket from Ella 3, French Guiana. July the 7th. A SpaceX Falcon Heavy rocket will launch the USS 52 mission for the U.S. Space Force, that's military. It will lift off from Pad 39A at NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Gosh, just going to stop there. It goes on and on. So many different organizations, the ESA, there's nothing in here from China or India, but they're launching into space as well. Lots of private stuff too. And the next segment of audio I want to play is a description of the Falcon rocket. And this is um, a reusable launch rocket, and that's one of the reasons why it's a SpaceX product. And because it's reusable, it's gotten some good press, as such things go. And one of the reasons I'm so fond of the next two pieces of description are because NASA has the whole TV network. They got NASA TV. They cover launches, and So you've got some subject matter experts, some interviewers, and in the background you've got all these flashy images that don't get described. And so my one of my life's missions is to get NASA to do more describing of the visual elements. And during the run of the podcast, this is something I kept going back to. Can we describe this? Can you describe that? Because NASA has some really big gaps in describing what it's actually doing. So we've got a 3.5 minute clip of a launch of the Falcon rocket. So Rick, could we play that now, please?
The launch was on May 30th, I believe, and it was a launch of a very tall, thin rocket called the Falcon. And the Falcon is shaped like a candle, really long, tall, thin. So the capsule is right at the tip of this long, tall rocket, the Falcon. So it looks like a tapered end to this tubular rocket. And when the Falcon with the capsule is standing ready for takeoff, it's standing supported by a tower of scaffolding. They do the countdown, you know, the rockets ignite, and when the Falcon rockets ignite, the scaffolding drops away at the same time as the rocket begins to blast off. The rocket shoots straight up into the air, straight up, with a long tail of flames that's pouring out of the bottom. And the flames are, in fact, this tail of flames are longer and thicker than the rocket itself. And it goes straight up. Then the flight path starts to curve a little bit, and they reach, I read something like 1,500 miles per hour, 1,500 miles per hour. And then, I know, it's incredible. And then like 2.5 minutes into the flight, the rocket, at this point, if you're filming from below, which a lot of people did, you're filming from the ground, at this point, 2.5 minutes, the rocket is really just a speck in the sky. You're zoomed in on it. It's just a tiny little speck. The most of what you can see is some flame, is the sparkling orange flame. And at that point, the views, if you are watching any of the media coverage that's online or on TV, the view switches from coverage on the ground to onboard cameras.
Oh.
And so at this stage, we switch to a camera that is inside the rocket itself, inside the long tube. So essentially what it looks like, imagine if you're like looking down a long toilet paper towel roll.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you're seeing.
Oh.
And the way these sections fit into each other, it's kind of like you got the long paper towel tube, that would be your Falcon rocket. And then you took a toilet paper tube and you stuck it on top of that. So you kind of, you squeezed one into the other.
Mm-hmm.
So now you've got your shorter capsule on the tip of the longer rocket. And so as you're peering down that, about 2.5 minutes into the flight, suddenly the long paper towel roll gets pulled away and disappears because it's dropped. And the camera is filming straight down the inside of those tubes. So you can see down the tube, suddenly the longer tube just vanishes, drifts away, and the rest of the rocket continues to go. So now you've got the capsule with a smaller rocket engine on the back. And there are a few separations, there are different separations for different missions. And eventually what you get to is the Dragon capsule looking more or less with one section, one tubular section still on the bottom of it, which has engines on it. And it looks at that point more or less like a bullet, right? A squat, short bullet.
Now, those descriptions are one way that astronomy and space exploration are becoming more accessible. There's descriptions like that. There are a lot of written descriptions of images. Alt text is becoming more used, which means that when an image is posted on a NASA website, there is much more likely these days to be a written description telling the reader what the image shows. So description is a really important way that information can be communicated. It's still describing images. And so another really important and innovative way that astronomy is becoming more accessible for the blind community is sonifications. And if you attended my previous presentation on astronomy, you have heard a couple of these. I'm going to explain what a sonification is, and then we are going to hear some. A sonification is taking data and mapping it to sound. And so we talked earlier about how a lot of astronomy is not visible to the eye. When things like the James Webb Space Telescope or the Spitzer Telescope, when they're looking up at the sky, they're not, you couldn't put your eye, if you were sighted, you could not put your eye to it and see what that telescope is seeing. What the telescope is recording is things outside the visual range. So X-rays, infrared, things that the human eye cannot see. So when NASA publishes these nice pictures, most of the time they're not actually pictures. They are the data that's been taken, and a visualization scientist has decided we're going to make this wavelength blue and we're going to make this wavelength red, and we're going to show them in this way so that people have something to look at, which is, that's fine. Visualizing is one way to represent data, but another way to represent data is through sound. A sonification is as simple as you're watching a cartoon and something falls and you hear meow and it hits the ground. That's a sonification. It's attributing sound to an action. And sonifications have been done for many, I would say dozens probably by now, of astronomical images. And they're a very powerful way to communicate information. And they have different levels of complexity. And so I have picked a few sonifications, and I'll let you know what you're going to hear in advance. So each sonification is under a minute. They're pretty short. And so what I've done is I've made an audio file for each one. So what you're going to hear is the sonification, which is a series of sounds that have been created to represent something. Then you're going to hear my voice pre-recorded reading the explanation of what you're hearing. Then you will hear the sonification again. And the second time, possibly it will make more sense. Now, I'm going to say again, I'm not a scientist. And so I engage with this to the level to which I can understand it. And that is not deep. That's not necessarily deep. So in the explanations that you will hear me read, there's a lot of big words. There's a lot of concepts I don't understand. There's a lot of concepts many people don't understand. And that's okay, because just the sounds themselves are interesting. And even if we only understand just a little bit about what they represent, I think they have huge value. And so these come from a company called System Sounds, and an astronomer and he's an astrophysicist and a musician who lives in Toronto, Matt Russo, and his partner Andrew Santokita, who's a musician also, and they create these sonifications. So the one I'm going to start with, I've chosen on purpose because it's a bit simpler. There's a little less going on. And so Rick, we're going to skip to number 7, please, the WASP 96B, if we can play that.
WASP 96b. NASA's Webb telescope observed the atmospheric characteristics of the hot gas giant exoplanet WASP 96b, which contains clear signatures of water. The resulting transmission spectrum's individual data points were translated into sound. The sonification scans the spectrum from left to right. From bottom to top, the y-axis ranges from less to more light blocked. The x-axis ranges from 0.6 microns on the left to 2.8 microns on the right. The pitches of each data point correspond to the frequencies of light each point represents. Longer wavelengths of light have lower frequencies and are heard as lower pitches. The volume indicates the amount of light detected in each data point. The new sounds were also adapted to a video, allowing sighted viewers to watch the progression as the vertical line moves across the graph, ringing out a musical note for each data point. The 4 water signatures are represented by the sound of water droplets falling. These sounds simplify the data. Water is detected as a signature that adds multiple data points. The sounds align only to the highest points in the data. This sonification does not represent sounds recorded in space. 2 musicians converted Webb's transmission spectrum to musical pitches to help listeners hear its data. WASP 90.
So that's some pretty complex science in there. I didn't understand it all, but that's okay. What I took from that is that there's a graph. It's showing data that suggests there's water on another planet. That I can understand. And if there's water on another planet, our concept of life suggests that that's an environment where life might also be, which is why that's so exciting. And I'm fond of that sonification because it just sounds cool, for one. The water droplets are like, oh, water. Okay, I get it. That's water. And as a non-scientist, I find that one clear as it can be to someone like me who's not really understanding the science all that well. Um, but it's something I can sort of wrap my mind around. It's a graph. I get what a graph is. And so it's data on a graph turned into sound, which I just think is fun. I have 3 more sonifications, but
I think the hard thing about that is
yeah,
not equating time with anything, right? Because it's when I hear that, I keep thinking, oh, it's moving, it's going in time. But I think that the tricky thing with some of these sonifications is to separate out that because it's going on in time does not mean that time is a variable.
thank you. Yes, yes, that's absolutely true. And I'm hoping that you're all hearing, if you've got headphones, you're hearing it pan from left to right. And what that's doing is it's carrying us across the image. And it's true, it's easy to think of that as a measure of time, but it is not. In that one that we just heard, that's moving from left to right across the graph, across the x-axis of the graph. And in the next sonification we're going to hear, also same thing, it's going to pan from left to right, and what that's doing is it's allowing us to conceive of the data in a almost in a linear way, in a movement way, going from one place on it's more spatial than time. And so this one is called the Cosmic Cliffs in the Carina Nebula, and it comes from the James Webb Telescope also. And I'm going to give a bit of background here. So when the James Webb Telescope came online, it was a pretty big deal. Last August, I believe it was, images began to be released. And at the same time as the images came out, there was some very well written alt text that came out with the images to describe them. And this alt text got some strange celebrity. It was very popular outside of the blind community as well. Sheri, do you remember that? Because it was in the Washington Post and people loved it, eh?
I do remember that, and I kept thinking, yeah, go you guys, do that all the time, because I mean, people put a lot of time and energy and care and passion into making those not only accurate but beautiful, and they were really great.
They were really great. And they brought a lot of attention to the idea of inclusion for astronomy within the blind community, which was really great. So I'd like to play, I think maybe just one more sonification. So Rick, could we play number 8, please?
Cosmic Cliffs Sonification. A near-infrared image of the cosmic cliffs and the Carina Nebula, captured by NASA's Webb's telescope, has been mapped to a symphony of sounds. Musicians assigned unique notes to the semi-transparent gauzy regions and very dense areas of gas and dust in the nebula, culminating in a buzzing soundscape. The sonification scans the image from left to right. The soundtrack is vibrant and full, representing the detail in this gigantic gaseous cavity, which has the appearance of a mountain range. The gas and dust in the top half of the image are represented in blue hues and windy, drone-like sounds. The bottom half of the image, represented in ruddy shades of orange and red, has a clearer, more melodic composition. Brighter light in the image is louder. The vertical position of light also dictates the frequency of sound. For example, bright light near the top of the image sounds loud and high, but bright light near the middle is loud and lower pitched. Dimmer, dust-obscured areas that appear lower in the image are represented by lower frequencies and clearer, undistorted notes. Cosmic.
So again, that's a lot. When I'm listening to sonifications, because it's just a thing I like to do, I listen, I read, I listen, I read the same thing again, I listen again, I read the same thing again. This material is so dense. I try really hard. I don't always succeed, but it's really rewarding. If you want to follow this up, all you have to do is Google James Webb sonifications, and there's or just astronomy sonifications, and you'll find lots of these. And if you're so minded to do it, it's a really interesting exercise, because once you start understanding what you're hearing, for me, it gave me a visceral experience, like a body experience, a sensory experience of astronomy that I had never had before. And so for me, even just to listen to it and sort of know what it is rewarding. And the deeper I try to understand it, the more rewarding it becomes. And Sheri, the next thing I want to do is to start talking about Astro Access. But before we do that, I'd like to just get any reactions you have to sonifications. Or you've heard some of these before, right?
Yeah, and I always feel like I'm at the verge of understanding them. Like I don't think I definitely have not spent enough time with them, but I feel like I could learn to make a spatial representation of what they're doing. I can't do it now, but I feel like I could, if in fact they are, if I could trust that they're the same, that people use the same definitions across images. You know what I mean?
Yes, that's a tough one. And it's a question people often ask in discussions of sonification. Is there a standard? And the answer is no, there is not a standard yet, anyway. And so people like Matt Russo and Andrew Santavita who are working on this, they're kind of just following their creativity. And they are kind of intended for the blind and low vision community, but they're not directly educational tools. And that's a direction I'd love to see the sonification world go to, because at the moment they're sort of, curiosities might be too dismissive, but they're attention grabbing because they're so cool and they sound really great. And they're also dense and kind of hard to parse if you don't take a lot of time with them. And so I think that that's one direction sonifications might go, is to become more standardized and a little more instructional and less sort of concept.
Yeah, I worry a
Concept.
little bit that they're sacrificing clarity of data for how cool and pretty they sound.
Yes. Yeah.
And I don't want that, because they're going to be cool and pretty no matter what. But I get,
Yeah.
so this is new, right? So we don't really know what the best way of doing this is. So we're just in the very beginning of sort of pattering around trying to figure out like what works and what is salient. I just feel like, here's the thing. If we were blind aliens and we'd been doing sonification from the get-go, like if that's what we did,
Yeah.
this would be cool. And people would be like, oh, there's this weird thing called light, and you could make pictures with it, and you could represent data with like light picture things. How should we do that? But that's not where we're at. We're doing the opposite thing. We're like, what do we do with this? How do we make sound meaningful? Because the pictures are not meaningful in and of themselves, like we keep saying, right? They are interpreted.
Yes. Yes. And this, it seems tangential, but it actually isn't. Sheri, have you read Project Hail Mary?
Yes, I have.
Yeah, okay. So the reason I bring this up is that Andy Weir, who wrote The Martian, who some of you might know the movie or the book, he's a great writer. I love his books. The Project Hail Mary involves an alien race who never evolved sight because they live on a planet with such an impenetrable atmosphere. Their atmosphere is so thick and composed in such a way that eyes couldn't see through it anyway. And so they're a spacefaring race. They've left their planet to try and solve a really important problem, and they meet a human, and these two individuals, a human and an alien who evolved without sight, find a way to communicate. And he does a great job of exploring what a culture might look like that did, what a terrible pun I just made there. How a culture might develop science and astronomy without vision. And so if you're interested in science fiction, highly recommend it. Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. And what I want to do now is very exciting, is talk about, are there blind people in space? Can there be blind people in space? Do we have a future as part of any spacefaring enterprise? Is that a thing that could happen? And I've known about Astro Access for a little while, very, very exciting. And when I sort of loosely got to know Sheri on social media and found out that Sheri was embedded in the Astro Access program, I was so eager to talk with Sheri and to invite Sheri to share what Astro Access is and her experiences with it with more of the blind community. And so, Sheri, can I turn over the floor to you and have you explain to us what Astro Access is and what your part in it has been?
Okay, so I'm going to try to make this story not long because no one wants a long story. So the question is basically, can a disabled person of any sort go to space? And the answer that we have been given is categorically, heck no, don't even think about that. That's ridiculous. Just look at our rules. Absolutely not. You can't do this. And that is the answer given to you by the rules, right? It's not an answer given to you by the actual experience of being in space. It's not an answer given to you by any kind of experience. It's kind of the, it's kind of the, oh my gosh, this is really hard. Could you please sit down? I'll make you a plate. Don't get in the way. I'll do this for you kind of mentality. So it's not a real, that no is not a real answer. That no is the reflexive answer that you as a disabled person, as a blind person here, whenever, well, not whenever, but lots of times when you try to do a thing, people will be like, oh, that's hot water. Let me pour that for you. That's where the answer is coming, which we know is not based on data, right? So if you think about your own experience, the number of times people have told you that you can't pour hot water, or you can't cross the street, or you can't, pick something up that you drop, whatever it is, y'all know. I don't need to tell you. So that answer of no comes out of sort of an able-bodied hysteria about disabled people. And it's, I don't know, we could say it's not their fault, whatever. But it doesn't come from data. So right now, what we're doing a lot is these suborbital flights, where basically you get strapped into a seat, you go into a cabin, you blast up, whoosh, you go really up high, really hard, really fast. You hang there for 3 minutes, you come back down. There are rules about who can do that based on the ideas of who can go to space. I mean, my friends, I'm not gonna lie, I could send a rabbit and he would be okay, right? I mean, so there's no reason why a disabled person couldn't do that. So the question is really not, can a disabled person go to space, but what do we need to do to sort of work through the misunderstandings that people have? And then also, to some extent, because this is a new environment, to work through what some of the access needs are if you're a blind person or a disabled person and you want to go to space, because it's not like being in your living room. I mean, it's really not, right? So if all you want to do is lay in a seat and blast into space and come back down, the question is, can you lay in a seat? And maybe can you run away from the capsule if it doesn't, what they call an off-nominal landing. I love the word off-nominal. It's an off-nominal landing. That means all hell is broken loose and we're kind of screwed, right? Okay, so Astor Access wanted to, or a nonprofit, were interested in answering the question. So if you think that disabled people are capable, full citizens of the world, and if you acknowledge that the world is going to space, how do we do this? How do we take a system that was designed for able-bodied people who can see and hear and move their arms and legs nominally, and who have nominal emotional and intellectual responses to the world? Like, that's what it's all based on, right? So how can we take that experience, which is designed for those people, and tweak it so that all of us can go? And so the super cool way that Astor Access started this, which is was kind of brilliant and also really super fun for those of us who were involved, is that we chartered a 0G parabolic flight. This is the flight colloquially known as the Vomit Comet. It is the way they train NASA astronauts. And it is basically, you get a bunch of people and you stick them in a 727, a big old airplane. You take out the first 2/3 of seats. That like an airplane is basically a big long tube, right? And you take out all the seats in the first 2/3 of the tube and you replace those with all kinds of pads, basically like wrestling mats, or not as thin as yoga mats, thicker, like gymnastic mats, gymnastic mats, wrestling mats, nice mats on the floor and the walls and the ceiling. And then you put all those people in the front of the plane and you're like, okay, lay down everybody, because here we go. And then you accelerate upward at an extreme angle, just like 45 degrees straight up. You get to about 30,000 feet, which is where airplanes fly. So we did not go to space. We just did this all in the atmosphere. And then you take the nose of that 727 and you aim it basically down right at the Earth, again, like at about a 45 or more degree angle, and you dive down, boom. And then in the airplane, because the airplane is basically falling toward the earth, all the people in the cabin on those mats experience about 20 seconds of zero gravity. And then they're like, okay, that's close enough. I better pull up. And then at about 10,000 feet before they, splat you on the ground, the airplane pulls up, and everybody, the coaches yell, feet down, coming out. And you all go, okay, zero gravity is over. I'm going to put my feet back at the ground. They all fall down on the mat. It pulls up and it goes up the other end of the parabola and does that 15 times, 20 times, depending. And the purpose was to sort of start the conversation about what zero gravity is like for a disabled person and sort of what you would need. So we're thinking about this as a blind person. Like, I rely heavily on gravity. I like gravity. If I'm in a bus, I know I can tell by the way the seats are pointing which way is the front of the bus, but mostly I rely on the fact that my feet are on the floor. I know where down is, right? But if you're floating in the bus and you're not touching the floor, and you're not touching anything, and you're just hanging there in zero gravity, how the heck do you know where to go? Like, how do you stay oriented? And so those are some of the questions. There's questions for people in wheelchairs, there's questions for deaf people. Those are some of the questions that we're starting to try to answer. So if you're a blind person and you're in zero gravity, how do you stay oriented? And what the heck do you do if you, quote, drop something? Because now if I drop something, if I drop my glass, it falls on the ground. I'm like, oh, there it is on the ground. I know which direction it went down. And then I heard it hit, so I kind of know where it is, so I can go get it. It's usually not that hard. Unless something weird happens, it's not that hard. So I can go get it. But if I drop something in zero gravity, if I'm on the International Space Station, it will just silently hang there. And so how do I get it back? How do I find it? How do I look for it without knocking it away from me? So that was our first sort of, there's a lot of other things to do, but that was our first kind of adventure into what could space be like for blind people, and can we manage it, and can we stay oriented? And if we can answer those kinds of questions, then we could start asking questions about, well, how does a blind payload specialist do her science while she's aboard the International Space Station? So we're just at the beginning of this, but that's kind of how we get started.
I am full of questions. My first two are, I want to know the answers to those. Okay, let's start. How do you orient yourself? What happened when you were in zero G? They said feet down. Well, what? Where? How? What's down? So
Yeah, kind of.
Can you address that one first? I'm dying to know.
Yeah, okay, kind of. Okay, so the thing is, of course, you try to stay oriented by sound, right? Like you would ordinarily. It's a little more complicated because, first off, the plane is wicked loud, which is too bad. Like if they could put me in a quiet zero gravity environment, I would do a lot better. But you still you sort of pay attention to where you are. But I mean, when you talk to astronauts about what it's like to be in zero G, if they're doing something else, Chris Dombrowski, who was one of the Inspiration 4 astronauts, he was in Earth orbit for about 4 days. I asked him if he ever got lost, and he said, well, sometimes he would be looking at his iPad without holding on to anything, and he'd be just sort of floating there, looking at his iPad, doing inventory or something. And then he would look up and realize that he had softly and silently like rotated or flipped upside down. And he had no idea. So in an environment where it's quiet enough, you could use sound cues. I found that I was on 2 flights, which is, I just don't even know how I got that lucky. The first flight, I was completely lost all the damn time. I just had none. The second time though, I was closer to the front row of seats on the airplane. The first 2/3 of the airplane is empty, right? But then you have to have seats to get out there, right? You're strapped into the seat to take off because it's a regular airplane flight. And I found that just by like keeping one finger in contact with anything, I was able to stay oriented as long as I could touch anything. Okay, this has happened to all of us, right? If you're fully blind like me, like every once in a while you'll get distracted, you'll be walking around the house, you'll just like be pacing or whatever, and you'll get turned around, and then you have to like touch something, and then you sort of wait for the environment to sort of solidify around you, like, oh, okay, I'm here.
Yes.
And then the map fills in, right?
Yes.
It's the same kind of thing, only it's a little more complicated. And I think we need more data, right? We need more blind people in zero gravity. We do not, I'm sorry, but we don't need sighted people with their eyes closed, because, you know,
No.
they don't know, they don't know what the heck they're doing. When it gets dark, they go, what?
Right.
Their brains go off, right? Poor things. They just don't really have the skills. Like
Yes.
if I'm wearing headphones and I'm wandering around my kitchen and maybe I'm dancing, because that happens, right? Dance with the headphones on. And then I like stop, I have to do something, take the headphones off. You know, I know how to approach a wall, put one hand out, identify where I'm at, and the environment solidifies around me, the map sinks in.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I know that sighted people can learn to do that, but we can already do it.
I'm wondering about, you said it would have been so much better if it was quiet. And so that's one extrapolation you've made into how a blind person might live in a zero G environment. What other extrapolations have you made? Like, what, when you think ahead, when you imagine a life in zero G, maybe there's a blind astronaut on the space station or something. What other kinds of things do you imagine happening to make that experience efficient, effective, and safe?
That's a super great question. So first off, the International Space Station is loud. And there are like really, it is really loud. It's not loud like the zero G flight. The zero G flight is loud, like the noise is coming from all around, and it's not. It's like loud, like you're on an airplane, only louder. So that noise is coming from everywhere. Which I don't like. It's too late. It's too loud. But on the International Space Station, there's not an engine propelling the thing through space. You don't have to deal with the noise of the air rushing past the outside of the fuselage, right? So the noises that you hear are sources of information that you can orient by. But also, the smart thing to do would be there's all kinds of handrails on the International Space Station, just because people need handrails, right? That's already a part of the environment. There's no reason not to put cute little informational tactile pieces of information, tactile graphics on those handrails, so that as soon as I catch hold of something, I have a little piece of information under my fingers. So one of the things that we tested aboard our second zero G flight were these little graphics that we put on the walls of the plane, but we could put them anywhere, that said tactily, in the zero G plane, it was important which way gravity was going to be when it came back. So we included that on the space station when you need that. But like it could say things like, okay, you are here. Hi, here's your tactile graphic. You're okay. We got you. And the nearest emergency exit is in this direction, and the nearest emergency equipment is in this direction. So that whenever you touch anything, whenever you touch a handrail, you would have that information immediately. So our graphics.
So it wouldn't be
you,
Braille, right? You're not talking about Braille text. You're talking about a series of symbols that you would learn to interpret. Is that right?
Right. I mean,
Okay.
partly I personally, since I personally wanted it to be Braille, but then people talked to me and said, no. Braille is useful and great. And we also want this to be usable by sighted people in the dark when they're scared, because the first thing that happens is the lights go off, right? In an emergency. So in 1997, there was a fire, and fire is the most terrible thing in the world in orbit, right? Because where the hell are you going to go?
Yeah.
There's a fire. So there was a fire aboard the Mir, which was the Russian space station. And they spent a lot of time battling this fire. By the problem they were having is that they were squinting into the smoke and they couldn't see. So they were trying this. So the commanders, who they all did a great job, and everyone was fine, and we're really glad about that. And they spent a lot of unnecessary effort, from my perspective, trying desperately to see the fire when they could have closed their eyes and felt where the heat was coming from and heard where the sound was coming from, and then use their fire extinguishers. And by the same token, if someone needed to find the fire extinguisher in that environment and the smoke were in their eyes, which it was, and they were having trouble, all kinds of trouble, right? The lights were off, it was dark, it was scary, they were terrified, which is reasonable. If on the space station that we would design, they would grab onto a railing and it would immediately say, okay, fire extinguishers to your left at a medium distance, emergency gear that you need other way to your right, or up in another, at another distance.
Yes. And this brings to the fore a really important issue, which is that it's not only about bringing disabled people into space, which is, hugely important, and I'm ready to go tomorrow. But people who go to space are going to have bad things happen to them, as has happened. And to be prepared, as you're saying, is super important. And so, as usual, the ideas of inclusion always expand outwards to benefit a wider audience.
Exactly. I like to say that space is always trying to kill you, because it kind of is. And if it can't kill you, it's perfectly happy to disable you. It's a dangerous environment. Accidents will happen, all kinds of terrible things. I mean, we are not evolved to be in space. It's bad for us.
Yes.
So we do not want our astronauts to get halfway to Mars and have, for example, everybody go blind, which can happen because there is a syndrome that happens in microgravity, where you start to lose visual perception. We don't have anyone who has gone blind in space, but we do have people who have lost measurable quantities of visual accuracy. And we cannot have those people get halfway to Mars and then not be able to run their equipment. We can't do that to them. We can't have them become disabled to the extent that they can't run their own environmental controls. So if we make things accessible before they go, then they're good. I mean,
and there have been at least two notable examples where on spacewalks where things happened and astronauts temporarily lost their vision. And it's fascinating to read about. And mostly what I got from accounts of that were, don't panic, think it through, let's problem solve. But there wasn't a lot of talk of, and when we prepared for this in our training, by not that blindfolding is, we know how troubling and fraught that idea is. However, what I didn't read that much of was in my training, when we spent extensive time imagining what it would be like to suddenly lose your vision and use other modes of perception to get around. I didn't hear a lot of that. And so there's do you think there's more room in the standard astronaut training for something like that?
I think so. And I think that if the environment is constructed so that those cues and that ability is there, they will learn to use it. And they might not be as fluent at it as if we're talking about vision, they won't be as good at it as a blind person will be. But I know sighted people who have learned non-visual travel techniques because they're O&M instructors, or I know a few sighted people who've learned to read Braille by touch. Not many, but some. It's doable.
Yep. I personally, I'm having a moment because I could just ask you questions all night, but I'm certain that people in the Zoom room have questions too. And so I feel like this is maybe a good time to open up the floor for questions. And I think Amy is going
I'm
to.
here.
Hi, you're going to manage the raised hands for us.
You betcha.
And so if, as you have questions, please raise your hand and Amy will call on you to speak. Sheri, if you got the opportunity to go into space tomorrow, would you go? If you got offered, say you got offered to go to Mars, which is like,
Oh, no, not Mars. Nope.
not Mars.
Not yet.
Nope. We don't have that. Technology is not stable enough, and I love my family too much.
Yes, yes.
I feel like we're a little early. I'm a big chicken. I don't like things that scare me. I don't like loud noises. I don't like fast movements. Initially I was really scared to go on the 0G flight. I thought I would be terrified and become incapacitated and curl into a ball and cry for my mama the whole time.
So why did you go?
I was super curious. And,
so you were more curious than you were frightened.
And can anybody go?
What?
Can anybody go? Or is this just something for like Uber people that work in space programs?
I mean, anybody can, okay, well, here's the deal. Anyone with sufficient funds can pay for a flight. It's about 10 grand.
Okay.
So
is that all? It's actually less than I thought. Not that I have
I say we apply for a grant.
I mean,
it's just space, peace, and zero gravity.
Right.
Astro Access is always, we're hoping to do more flights, and we get our people from people who apply.
Yeah, so there is a selection process, right?
There is. We like people who, are interested in space, and who have, so we've shown that disabled people can do this thing. And now what we need to do is figure out, we have specific experiments and investigations that we need to run, and we need people whose disabilities fit them for those particular experiments. So it's not just like, hey, you're disabled, let's go fly because you're cool. I wish I could do that, because dang, I want to do that for everybody. But now it's kind of like, so we want to test this kind of thing. Can you get into a seat? If you have this kind of paralysis, can you get into a seat in zero gravity and buckle yourself in the requisite amount of time? Or if you are a deaf person, what happens when you're signing ASL and like you're upside down and the other person isn't? Or what if you're blind, and how does this tactographic work? Is it really a good idea? Like we're at the question asking phase.
We do have a hand. Speaking of question asking phase, and maybe it's a comment, I don't know, but let's see what Karim has to say. Karim, you're gonna unmute yourself?
Hello.
There you are.
Yeah, hello. Yeah, I just want to add, in terms of access to space, NASA has changed the rules recently to allow a, quote, disabled person to go on a mission into space. Now then, the rule change is you have to have your sight, you have to have your hearing, you have to have 2 functioning arms, but only 1 functioning leg.
Yes.
So you could be down 1 leg, whether it's loss of control or function or amputee or whatever, but that's the slight nod they've given so far.
Yes, and you're actually talking about the European Space Agency, I think.
Yeah.
They are doing a disabled astronaut feasibility project. They have one gentleman with a prosthetic leg. His name is John McFall. He rocks. He's a cool dude. And so they have not said that he can go to space, but they said that he can train as an astronaut alongside other folks, and they're going to see how that works out. I'm here to tell them it's going to work out fine. It's not a big deal. Let him go to space. Quit your fussing. It's going to be fine.
Yeah. In that circumstance, I'd say sure.
Sheri, how do you think that's going to progress? Like, do you have a sense of what's going to happen in the ESA as he trains?
My money is not on the ESA, and my money is not on NASA. My money is on folks like Blue Origin and Virgin Galactic, who are going to get paying customers who want to go, or SpaceX. So Haley Arsenault, who flew aboard the Inspiration 4 mission, had an artificial femur. It's a notable disability that would have disqualified her as being a NASA astronaut, but it wasn't super. It's a small thing from our perspective, right? So I think that what is going to happen is, given the proliferation of folks who are offering access to space, that's where it's going to come from. Someone is going to say, hey, I've got the money.
From the commercial access. Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be all about capitalism. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Before we move forward, Sheri, I noticed that your camera is not on. Do you know this? Do you want to be off camera? Because both Christine and I are spotlight in this square, and it feels like you're the voice from space.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I thought it was on. Hang on. I'll mute myself.
That way we can have us all in the same square together.
Same square. There is definitely a capitalist thing going on in space, and as a lifetime reader of science fiction, for me, they're proceeding apace. They're going exactly the way that many science fiction writers imagined that they would, which is people would start to see a profit motive, and that's what drives capitalism, is the profit motive. And so one of the drivers in the classic sci-fi is the asteroid belt. So between Mars and Jupiter, there's what is possibly an X-planet, a planet that used to be a planet but is broken up. And so there's tons of resources out there, metals and things that at some point it's going to be worth somebody's while to go out and mine them. And so in my science fiction experience, that's where the commercial stuff really goes. Sheri, where do you think the commercial impetus is going to lie? Is it just going to be space tourists?
I think it's going to start with the space hotel in orbit. And as the cost per kilogram goes down of launching people into space, where people are going to go, probably we're going to start point-to-point travel, so that you will, if you really want to get from California to China in an afternoon and not spend that 24 hours of horribleness on the plane, you will launch into space, spend 45 minutes floating happily in zero gravity, and then return, which would be lovely if you can afford that.
I had not thought about that.
Me either.
Although I have to say, and I hope this doesn't sound like it's too soon, but this reminds me of a certain vehicle that just visited the site of the Titanic.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, we have to make sure that we know what we're doing, and that we're careful with people. And there are committees forming now about regulations and making sure things are safe, stuff like that.
Yeah, there's lots of smart people thinking ahead about this, like space law. And I know Chris Hatfield, my dream interviewee, he's involved with that. There's lots of people thinking about how to make standards for this kind, for safety and for legality. There's a lot. There's a lot to consider. And as you alluded to, Amy, it's at this point very much a rich person's game, right? And it probably always will be, unless you're an asteroid miner who's, if anyone's watched the TV show The Expanse or read the books, there's another really interesting view of the not too distant future where people are brought out into space as miners, as workers, and develop their own culture of living.
The other thing, though, like if you have a hotel, you need service people. So some poor sucker is going to have to make those beds, right? Or straighten those hammocks and cook the food and shepherd people around and keep everybody safe. I mean, right now, a lot of an astronaut's job on board the International Space Station is housekeeping and keeping everything going, right? So, which is kind of a waste of time if you're a super smart person with scientific knowledge. Like you have to sit around, half your day changing light bulbs and sweeping the floor. Eventually, we're going to get other people up there to change light bulbs and sweep the floor, metaphorically. So there'll be service workers whenever there's rich people going. And there will always be science, right?
And is the hotel, let me just ask the hypothetical question about the hotel. Is that really just about the view from the hotel? Because obviously you're not going to be in zero gravity floating around in a hotel room and trying to chase your grapes through zero gravity and you know what I mean? Like your food flying off your plate and whatever.
But I think it will be, right? Because part of it is the view, but part of it is also flipping upside down in the hallway. Like I'm confident that like many of the hotel blueprints that I've seen people invent have a big room for floating and playing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that at least initially, people will be super excited about maybe doing a little science too. Like you want to contribute to you want to be like astronaut of the human race, number 700 or number 800 or number 1200.
Mm-hmm.
Like what we have to contribute. I think that would be.
Come back with the t-shirt.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think it is about the view. And I think people really, really emphasize the view. But even without the view, you still know you're in space.
Yeah.
And okay, I'm not gonna lie, zero gravity is really, really, really fun.
Unless you get sick easily, then maybe not so fun for you and other people in zero gravity space that you're sharing space with.
I didn't feel sick at all, so I don't know. But so I think that it's possible that blind people might have we don't know yet, but blind people might have a slight advantage because we're not looking at other people floating upside down. So maybe we won't. That's one of the triggers. There's a couple triggers for space sickness, and one of them is visual. So we at least won't have that.
I came across the most fascinating tidbit that I did not know when I was doing some digging around to put together this presentation, which is that in the early iterations of the space program in the United States, NASA recruited a dozen or so deaf people from the Gallaudet School, and they wanted a particular kind of cause for hearing loss that had to do with the inner ear. And I don't remember the specifics, but what the point was that they brought this group of volunteers along with researchers into sickening kinds of environments, like crazy aerobatics, ships in big swells, and the people who had a certain particular kind of inner ear problem had no motion sickness at all.
That's where balance comes from, your inner ear.
Yes. And so I don't remember it was a particular cause of deafness that related to the balance centers, and what that was really important research that was done in figuring out some of the causes of space sickness and motion sickness, and I had never heard of it until I kind of went digging.
That's true. The Gallaudet folks they did all kinds of crazy ass things to those poor people.
Yeah.
And we have flown in Astro Access. We have flown three deaf flyers and three deaf flyers, and none of them have had any signs of space sickness at all. Like one guy, my one friend Eric Shear, who has flown 3 times, twice with us and once on his own through some other venue. They were just hanging out. They're cool. They're like sitting up. They really tell people during the acceleration phase not to move your head, just lay down, just like don't move your head, because that's when your inner ear will slosh around, you will get sick. And they're just kind of like, oh, this is fun. I'll just sit up. They're watching everybody.
That is a beautiful example.
We're talking about blindness gain and deafness gain.
Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah. And it's an amazing example of how including more people just broadens the pie for everyone, right? It's the pie for everyone. I want to reintroduce the question that I began this evening with, which is in this time of the dire state of the world, is it right to be putting resources toward space exploration and the study of astronomy? And Sheri, do you have an interest in answering this question? Do you want me to answer this question? How do you feel about that?
I think it's a legitimate question. My first answer is it's possible to care about more than one thing at a time. That's always the answer, right? It's possible to care about the adventure outward and the environment. It's possible to care for all these things. But my answer to this question, which is always evolving, so I'm super interested in hearing your example, your answer to this question, is that we have to do everything we can. Because we are really on a collision course with our own folly. We have pushed our planet to the brink, and we need to do whatever we can to bring it back. And that means ecology it means conservation, and it also really desperately means science. And we cannot afford, for example, to have a space program that excludes people arbitrarily. We need our best minds in space and on the ground in STEM fields working on the problem. We really need everybody to do everything we can. And it might turn out, just like space gave us GPS, and space gave us other scientific advancements, that's what we need. But I'm super interested in hearing your answer.
Well, of course, my answer is yes, it's worth it. I approach it from a few different angles. One is, if you look at the money we spend on subsidizing petroleum companies, the military, the US military is, I think, the largest polluter on the planet and spends vast amounts of money. And so when you do a bit of comparing of, okay, we could take the money we put into the space program and allocate it differently, but we'd be way more effective if we took the money we put into militarism and did that. And so I feel that when people ask this question and answer it with no, it's not, we should be focusing our money and our resources somewhere else. I think that they're looking at the wrong target. I think there's way lower hanging fruit that we should be looking at first. And the second, well, okay, I have three prongs that I approach this with. The second is that curiosity is just good. It's good for us to understand how things work. And for example, I heard this amazing presentation on electricity recently, and it was about the history of the discovery and understanding of electricity. And when the earliest scientists were looking at electricity and experimenting with it and singeing their eyebrows and making bad things happen in the lab, they didn't know what it was. They didn't know how to harness it. They had no idea that it would lead to things like dialysis machines and washing machines and lights to see at night, or all of the things that we rely on electricity for. And so we don't always know the effects of what we investigate. We don't know the long-term effects. And then prong 3 of my answer is that I'm a very, very gloomy thinker when it comes to our future. And again, as a big science fiction reader, I've been primed to think of things like colony ships, who might get off the planet, who, again, it will probably come down to money. But if there's a future for humans, I think it's reasonable to try and think about part of that future being in space. I don't think that's a misallocation or a poor allocation of our energy and our money and our resources, is to be thinking about it in those terms. And who knows how any of those things will play out, but those are my three-pronged, that's my three-pronged answer. And if anyone has their own answer that they would like to give to that question, we would love to hear it. So raise your hand. Weigh in.
Tag on to that. I mean, who is humanity, right? If we're going to be a spacefaring nation, a spacefaring planet, a species that goes to space, who are we? Are we only non-disabled people? I mean, I hate to break it to everybody, but the way that we've gotten to where we are now is everybody, disabled people and non-disabled people both. Disabled people have played crucial roles in art, science, history. I mean, we have not had the advantages and the access that the rest of folks have had necessarily, but we still, as a group, played crucial roles. And our human species would not be where we are without all the disabled people also playing their part. So I think it's folly to assume that we can just eliminate those disabled people and when we go to space. If we are going to transfer our species to another planet, we legitimately need all the people who've gotten us to this point. Not just, we can't select down to a few able-bodied people and think that we're going to be the same, because we won't be the same.
Sheri, I'm haunted by a story that I heard you tell in an interview. It was a couple of years ago that I just was interested and listened to. And I don't want to tell this story for you, but I have to sort of cue you to be able to tell it yourself. But it was about you having been on the Nastro Access flight and coming back and being in the airport. And I guess I just have to tell the story because yeah, do you have a clue what I'm talking about?
I
Probably not.
absolutely have a kid because it is the thing that haunts me.
Please tell the story because years later I still think about it.
It's not a happy story.
No, it's not.
So, I mean, we knew that we could do this thing. I never doubted that we could do this thing, that we could get disabled people, we could go on a flight, we could do it, we could be successful because, we could do things, right? I don't doubt that. But having done it, there was this indescribable sense of elation and just joy. And I remember at one point I was walking down on a separate flight that I was ground crew floor. I took some we had some fabric up on the wall and I'd taken it down after the flight and I'd rolled it up and it was on my shoulder and I was walking down off the narrow stairway that led from the back of the 727 to the ground. And I had this roll of fabric on my shoulder and I thought, oh my God, I did it. We did it. We designed these experiments. Disabled people designed these experiments. We flew on the 727. We did it. We did the things that astronauts do. We did good science. And I was so grateful and so elated. And then what's coming, right? And then I go to the airport to get on the very ordinary plane to get home, where the only damn thing I had to do was walk down a jetway and sit in a regular seat and buckle in. And you guys know how we're treated at airports, right? Like, do you want to board early? Can I help you? Like the flight attendant walking backward down the aisle in front of you going, keep coming, keep coming, keep coming, clapping your little hands like you're a puppy dog.
I've never had that one, but
no.
Or like you're walking down a jetway and there's dudes behind you, which is the story I think that I told.
Yes.
And they keep saying a little left, a little right, a little left, a little right. Just a minute before I would have detected the slight curve myself.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh my God, it's the same. Like we come back to a spatter of applause and everything is the same.
Yeah.
And the thing that fills me with such despair, honestly, is that we do these magnificent things and we show that we can do these things and we come back to the earth and the earth is the same and the people are the same and we're perceived the same.
Yeah.
And boy, that swing from elation to we can be leading scientists and astronauts to, yeah, but the guy behind me in line thinks that I can't walk down a hamster tube.
Yeah.
It's a lot. It is heartbreaking. I just don't have words for, I mean, we've all experienced the rage and the sorrow and that, just that sense of, come on, people, don't be like this.
Yeah.
But the contrast between, what new things we just did.
So what's the solution to that? Because the truth is that there may be many people, let's just say blind folks in particular, who want or need that support. And so what's the message that we send to in terms of allyship, right? And for me, I always say, ask the question, do you want assistance? Don't you? But they're all different access needs, right?
100%. And I think it is all about access. Like if I say no, which I always do clearly and directly, and they continue, that means that my opinion of myself is not the data that they feel like they need. Like I got nothing.
They know you better than you do.
Yeah, like if you want and need and feel comfortable with like going down the jetway with a person holding your arm, that is 1000% cool.
Mm-hmm.
But that is your individual need, which is absolutely respected. But the simple fact that you can't see is not why you have that need. You have that need because of complicated, you're a human being, right? You've got a need. And that is fine. And if you ask for it, you should receive it. And if you say, but you should ask for it and receive it, and people should respect you as an individual and give you what support you require, not assume that you are, not assume that they know what your needs are because you present in a particular way.
Yeah. I think for me, that's the only way we balance all the different access needs on this planet is you either ask somebody or let them ask for what they need. And again, I know lots of people in the disability community who are uncomfortable asking for what they need and are waiting for somebody to say, can I assist you? But that can I assist you should go to everybody, not just somebody who's got a white cane or a guide dog.
100%.
Right? It should go to everybody.
They assume that because I have a white cane, I have this really complex set. They're talking to the blind person in their heads, not the blind person who's standing by them.
Or they're talking to the blind person they've seen on media, in movies, and Al Pacino in Scent of a Woman. They're talking to that guy who can't find his way across the street, but yet somehow drives a car. Go figure. Yeah, right. So I think media plays a very strong role in some of the stigmatization and the attitudinal barriers. They come from somewhere, right?
And the same thing is true with able-bodied people, right? Like I know people who would be who are able-bodied, who are desperate to please just get on the plane, a little bit early. They want to pre-board. They just really need that, and they can't.
That's why you ask everybody.
Ooh,
if they need assistance.
Yeah.
Because then you're not othering people by the ask.
Yes.
It's a complicated conversation.
It is a complicated conversation.
And we're just coming down to the end of our time here, Chris. So if you've got one last thing you want to share or say.
We are. I don't know. Do I want to wrap up with anything? I think one of the things I love about how much more accessible astronomy is and space exploration are than they used to be is the young people, the children, because Sheri, when you and I were growing up, I'm sure we shared the same experience. You could read sci-fi, you could watch space documentaries and know that you'll probably never get into space. But a blind kid today, they can listen to sonifications, they can read image descriptions, they can know that a disabled astronaut is in the training program in the European Space Agency. And those are really good things. And so a disabled kid growing up today might be going into space. And the access measures that we have in place now are, they're just at the beginning, but they make a new normal. They raise the bar for disabled kids, for blind kids, and the idea that blind kids can enter STEM, and that to me is one of the best parts. And Sheri, any concluding ideas or thoughts?
Yeah, I think the thing that we need to remember is that science is not. It's not a gift people give to you because they want to give it to you. Science belongs to you. If you are a human being alive and awake on this earth, science belongs to you as part of your birthright as a human being. This is not a gift that we wait to be given. And if people withhold it from you, then you take it. Because science is your birthright. It is not special for some people and other people don't get it. It belongs to all of us, no matter who we are.
I love that.
Beautiful. Thank you, Sheri. Oh my God.
Well, one more thing before we let Sheri go for sure, is we have a prize draw.
Prize draw.
We got to do a prize draw.
Ah.
So I know. So Sheri, you're going to witness this because Christine is our special guest host this evening. So Christine, I'm going to put you in Lindsay's hands, and Lindsay's got all the names of our participants. Yeah. And when you pull a keyword, I'm so excited to hear what keyword this would be. She'll pull a name of the winner tonight.
All right. I'm going to go with Nebula.
Nebula.
We've got Ruth Bieber.
It's Ruth. Wonderful.
Hasn't Ruth won a bunch of times? I'm having deja vu. That's great. Yay, Ruth.
Nice one.
It's the luck of the draw, friends.
The luck of the draw. Absolutely.
That's wonderful. So we'll connect with Ruth to send you off your prize. It's a surprise prize. So we'll send that off to you.
Maybe it's a model of the Enterprise. See what I did there? Oh, I'm just kidding. Sorry. It's late here, you know.
I know, right? It's just about tomorrow for you all.
Almost.
So thanks for hanging in there. But I just want to, thank you both for coming into the space and sharing this. Well, this really is a gift, even though science is the birthright. But this, the work that you both do and the interest that you both have, the passion that you both have around this subject, to offer that to folks who may just be learning about space or maybe interested but don't know how to get involved.
Yeah, and just engage at your own level. You don't have to understand everything. God knows I don't, but and just engage to the level at which you feel good and curious. Yeah. Thank you for the opportunity, Amy. I love to talk about this stuff. And it was honestly, I'll just say it, it was kind of an excuse to just talk with Sheri. Because we're in different places, right? We can't just go for drinks.
This is the opportunity to talk about this stuff with all y'all. Such a wonderful evening.
Yay. Thank you so much, friends, for joining us tonight in the VocalEye Almost Live space for a speed date with the cosmos.
VocalEye, vocaleye.ca. Special thanks to our funders, the Canada Council for the Arts, the British Columbia Arts Council, the Province of British Columbia, and the City of Vancouver.